what is your relationship like with your own creativity and the mystery of that creativity, given your sort of devout rationalism?
I think part of my rationalism allows for or calls for the wisdom of it, that the growth in it is that I think the journey is about becoming comfortable with discomfort. That's kind of what Groundhog Day, this musical that I wrote with Danny Rubin, who wrote the movie, is really a meditation on how to live meaningfully in a meaningless universe, really, which I think is really now kind of what I'm talking about in my TV show and in Groundhog Day, and even in my album. I'm trying to find ways to tell the story of a meaningless existence so that it's beautiful. I think meaning is in narratives, it's in the stories we tell ourselves, and I think religion is one story you can tell yourself, but I don't think you need to have myth to tell yourself a beautiful story about living fleetingly in this universe, sort of thing. As for art, the question of how one creates, and as you say, the magic of that, and it does feel magical sometimes, although mostly it feels like extracting teeth. I feel like art is a bit like consciousness. Consciousness doesn't particularly, to me, require an explanation beyond. I am comfortable sitting with consciousness as an emergent property of this extraordinarily complex neurology, which we don't quite understand yet. And any further hypotheses about what consciousness is or what inspiration is or stuff, it interests me, but doesn't keep me up at night. It's not something I'm pursuing, you know? I don't think writing a song is particularly different from doing some nice plumbing.
Possibly not, depending on the plumbing and the song. I mean, both need improvement in my own life. If a minute ago you saw me sort of flip off to the side to use a perhaps inappropriate colloquialism, it's because I hold this up when I think someone has said something that we'll use as a quote to promote the show, and the extracting teeth creativity was one. I didn't want you to think that I had either a peculiar twitch or a secret agenda. Fuck this guy!
Get me my floss. I can't talk to Minchin with this thing between my teeth.
It's bothering me. Now, this idea, though, about sort of, there's obviously loads of things you said there that really interest me. Because my assumption with the emergence of the new atheists, and then sort of, to forgive the term, celebrity kind of atheists, yourself, Ricky Gervais, etc., like, was a kind of an anti-establishment motif that sort of was, or a movement that was important, an important way of attacking a lot of entrenched ideas that are ultimately about domination, not about mystery, not about beauty, not about unity, not about togetherness. Where where you and I have distinct views or opposing views, I suppose, or different and not necessarily opposing, is that I feel that consciousness, that the idea that consciousness emerges from matter requires the sort of precisely the same kind of faith that the opposite view requires, and the idea that there is no, whilst I recognise that meaning is often a kind of confection because they're so multitudinous, the presence of the universal in myth and theology, whether that ultimately becomes about psychology or even, hormones and neurology,
the evolution of our protein bridges.
It's still a kind of language. It's still a kind of pattern. The other thing is, because I've had sort of, and it's difficult in a way to attribute a particular narrative to this and have any sort of stance of objectivity around it. I recognise that's sort of beyond me, the limitations of that term.
All of us, yeah.
I have experienced aspects of consciousness that are impersonal, that are be like where I have experienced awareness that is not Russell, both as a younger man with psychedelics and sort of more latterly through sort of yogic and breath-based experience, right? So it's sort of like, for me, the door is open, and I can't know more than or less necessarily than anybody else about that. My concern about the rationalist, materialist, post-enlightenment view is that it leads to where we are now. I would say the dominant ideology is not that there is this mystery and that we're all one and we're only experiencing a tiny fragment of reality due to the limitation of our senses, and all scientific data that we receive necessarily is filtered through the limited senses, even if it involves amplification of them, and the disruption of the laws of physics, thermodynamics at the sort of quantum level means that our objective understanding of reality is itself limited and liable to change the more we learn. And I think when we remain open to those kind of ideas, we remain open to changing society. And I think a lot of the sort of post-structuralism, post-modernity that we're experiencing lately in the sort of identitarian politics movement is about, literally the deconstruction of power dynamics that have brought about tyranny, persecution, and the arse end of it, genocide, and still now social disruption. And I think remaining open to this idea that we're experiencing a small part of reality, none of us know for sure what it is, but there are certain universal emotions, i.e. love, and of course the shadow of that, but that if we identify with that love and all of our right to love, and the idea that this love is a kind of a longing for connection, and perhaps even a longing for oneness, for union, which certainly linguistically that seems to be the case when the word is analysed across cultures, across languages, then it sort of presents us, I think, with a very optimistic worldview, or at least a hopeful worldview. So that's I guess what I would want you to spend a few minutes chatting about.
Well, you said a lot of things there. It's firstly, I agree that the new atheist movement was just another wave of iconoclasm trying to take power away from power structures that were damaging. So when we get to the end of what you were talking about there just then, we're going to talk, the kind of conclusion of this is the world's a bit shit and we've ended up in this place, and what are we to attribute this spiritual decay or this loss of community and this carelessness about species and the earth and the nuclear proliferation and the emergence of AI that might destroy us and all this. So all this stuff that you could call spiritual decay, if you like that word, I'm getting comfortable with it. The new atheism, or the celebrity atheist that all I've ever done is criticized where what I perceive to be erroneous belief systems intersect with bigotry and prejudice. So with the exception of sort of the stuff that just logically disintegrates the idea that prayer has a causal relationship with outcomes in illness and stuff, which is simply explaining why people think that's the case, even though the data shows it's not the case, which is talking about confirmation bias and being clever and talking fast. Have you ever met anyone like that? But mostly it's about you can't use your religion to say you don't like the gays, and that sort of thing. So my atheism is more about saying, if you want to have beliefs that are based on supernatural stuff, then that's fine. But if you want earthly results for your belief, if you want to assert that your supernatural interpretation of this ancient book allows you to go into Parliament and say, therefore, no abortions, then you have to prove the existence of God, and you can't, so fuck off with your magic book, right? So that's my atheism.
Can I just step in at that point? Because what I feel about that, Tim, is that the key problem that you've identified there is more present in rationalism, materialism, and sort of neoliberalist politics than it is in any religious ideology in 2020.
It's not one or the other. You criticize all of it. You criticize erroneous belief across the board.
Except one of those ideologies has no hope, I think, of delivering us a different type of society, and the other one does. Now, with the extraction of what you've identified, with the extraction of I believe in Jesus or Muhammad or Buddha or whatever, and therefore I've decided don't be gay. That's sort of that's children's problems. But what I feel is that if we were to sort of have as best we can a kind of a data-oriented approach to the problems of the world, who is impoverished, who is suffering, and who benefits, and why are these structures in place, who is conserving, preserving, propagating these structures, then we won't, like at the top of it, won't be like a bunch of popes and ayatollahs. It's going to be people that believe in neoliberalist ideology. It's economic. The real fundamentalism, the real religion, is an economic one, and
it's greed.
Yes, which is an emotion that we're of course all subject to. But what I would say is, if the objective is change the world, if the objective is make people feel better, like we were discussing at the beginning of this podcast, ought our target not be the thing that's most likely to bring about change? Ought we not be critiquing the thing that's most problematic? And I'm not sort of saying, because as I say at the beginning of your career, I think during the time that you've been in the public eye, the sort of emphasis and focus has changed. I think it was a really worthwhile target. And of course, there are all sorts of people being persecuted and condemned and suffering as a result of mad religious ideologies still. But I would say that the figure, it pales in comparison to who is suffering as a result of consumerism, capitalism, the domination of surveillance tech, etc.
Yeah, I think I think you and I would identify, give or take 100 books that you've read and I haven't, and maybe 30 that I've read and you haven't. We basically will think the same thing about everything, right? And a broader way to talk about this, I mean, you can talk about the fact that you think consciousness being an emergent property of neurology requires faith equal and opposite to the idea that it was bestowed upon us by a spiritual being or something.
No, that it existed anyway. Panpsychism, that it's a pre-existing quality.
Yeah, and I that doesn't gel with me, but it kind of doesn't matter. I don't think which one of those in this conversation. I don't think you and I are going to, never be able to speak again on that one.
Let's not know the origin of consciousness together.
Need to know that, yeah, exactly.
All right, thanks for listening, and go over to Luminary now and subscribe. You get a real good deal. Cheers, guys.